You said you don't eat vegetables? I cut those out too.
Yeah. I don't eat fruit either.
Okay, that's probably not good.
Don't take vitamins.
Just
wake up.
Dr. Pepper.
I actually haven't had soda in a while.
Oh, dude, let's go.
Yeah. I'll definitely have one at work.
You want to kick this one off?
No, you're the professor.
Well, we're calling I have the glasses. All right, welcome back. This is Mayhem Performance Coaching Toolkit Series number 2. It's really going to be like a 1B. We're going to build off of what we were talking about last time. Last time we talked about the principle of the 70% rule. So just a really quick summary. It's once you identify your limiters and your weaknesses in training, we talked a little bit about how to do that. But the second part was, how do you actually approach them in training? You would take 70% of your training week or a day, potentially 2 as well. We went through both examples, and you would devote it towards training your limiter. So what we're going to do today now is show you kind of how you actually do that. Take it a step further and show you based on whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced athlete, or you're a coach working with a beginner, intermediate, or advanced athlete, how you would take that limiter using another example and actually progress it week to week. So Dom,
cool.
Yeah,
so we're going to use the ring muscle up as an example, and we might do this the next few episodes, is just like pick different movements and teach you guys how to attack those limiters. But I feel like the ring muscle up is a really common limiter for most people in the CrossFit space, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or elite or advanced athlete. There's different things that are going to cause the ring muscle up to cause problems. So if we go ahead and just kind of dive right in, when we're looking at a beginner, usually the issue with the beginner is like they have 1 ring muscle up, or maybe they can get 2 or 3 on a good day. But the minute we put that in a workout or with anything else or any type of fatigue, they can't even do a ring muscle up, right? So it's like, all right, how do I really develop that? Well, I think the biggest issue for the beginner is there's probably some skill deficiencies there, which of course we can isolate, but a lot of it comes down to like gymnastic strength. And usually what I try to do with beginners is pull them back and rebuild foundations for a strict ring muscle up, because most people have kipping or a couple kipping ring muscle ups. And if you can develop the skill and the strength necessary for a strict ring muscle up, then you're going to do a lot better with the kipping. Then from there, like let's say the beginner got that and they advanced themselves to an intermediate athlete, then we're going to work on volume accumulation. Now this is someone who, let's say, can do the open workout. I think it's like a 13-minute AMRAP. It's like 60 cal row, 50 toes to bar, 40 wall balls, 30 power clean, and then 20 ring muscle ups. They get to the ring muscle ups with like a minute left, and they can do like 5 or 6 in that minute. And they're doing singles, maybe they're doing doubles, or maybe they can even like hang on to doubles for like 2 minutes and get like halfway through the 20 ring muscle ups. That's great. What do they need? They need volume accumulation of the ring muscle up. We're going to talk about how that looks. That's not always under fatigue. We can introduce intermediate athletes to fatigue, but really they need to develop volume now that they have the skill and strength. And then finally, quick overview before we dive into what that actually looks like. An elite or advanced athlete, let's say this person can get through a full round of that open workout and get back to the rower. This is someone who can probably do 20 plus unbroken ring muscle ups fresh. Now we're going to start to identify limiters that affect the ring muscle up. Hip flexion, like a GHD sit-up or a toes to bar or rowing. We're going to check this under breathing fatigue. So if we mix it with machines or with double unders or with burpees, things that really affect the heart rate. And we're even gonna, this is short for interference, purposeful interference. What happens when there's another shoulder movement in the workout? Very similar to the quarterfinals workout from this year that had handstand push-ups and pulling, and then the ring muscle ups are at the end and all of a sudden you can't do anything. That is what we would work with an elite athlete, is now pairing the ring muscle up with other movements under fatigue. So let's roll us back to the beginner and let's kind of just talk briefly. I'm gonna let Jake jump in here on how we would kind of progress week 1, week 2, week 3, a beginner in like skill and strength.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to chime in on one more thing. I think I forgot to do this at the beginning. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff here, and we're using one movement as an example, the ring muscle up. How many movements do we have in CrossFit total? Like, do we even know?
No, they just invented horizontal pegboard, so.
Oh, let's go. Like 100 movements or whatever it is, something crazy, right? So, and then thousands of movement combinations. You guys are going to have questions, right? And what was really fun for me as the teacher, glasses, right, was that you guys emailed me your questions. So just a reminder to you that as you have questions about the topics that we're talking about, fire them over. I had a lot of fun last week responding to your emails, sending videos. So keep sending them my way. That was a lot of fun for us. So let's look at the beginner. Again, recap, beginner is somebody, I love Dom's example of the open workout. You're like, man, if I get up there and I do 1 ring muscle up, I'm gonna the whole gym's gonna be cheering for me, which is awesome. But we want you to be able to finish a workout like that, hit all 20 ring muscle ups at the end. So the biggest thing we're gonna focus on, the skill is so tricky, right? That is really highly individualized. That we're going to save that for another conversation, another toolkit down the road. Maybe that's episode 27 if we get to that point. We're going to hone in on this, on strength in particular. So Dom's going to start writing down a couple examples of what that might look like week 1, 2, and 3. But the biggest thing what we mean as strength is upper pulling and upper pressing strength. And then for the ring muscle up specifically, you need to get stronger in vertical pulling. And then we kind of call it like downward pressing in the dip in particular. So how we might set that up, I know Dom and I are pretty similar on this. We were talking about it before, and we both agreed. We probably have, again, let's go back to the 70% rule, 3 days a week. So we'd probably approach upper pulling and pressing strength at least 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I guess we could have flipped the board here. We maybe had a little more room. Good. But yeah, it's upper, lower, upper, rest, upper, lower, split. And then the 3 days a week that we're doing upper body training, we're going to focus on strength in the pull-up and the dip. So just to keep it really simple, on Mondays, I don't know about you, Dom, I'd probably be doing ring pull-ups and ring dips. Keep it simple. You could superset those. You could pair them together. You could train them in isolation. You could do weighted versions. You could do more advanced methods where you're doing more time and attention with tempo, etc. A lot of variations there. But for now, to keep it simple, you could just run a linear progression, a very consistent progression of doing strict ring pull-ups and strict ring dips. What does a simple linear progression look like potentially? Dom, you want to maybe chicken scratch something at the bottom? Yeah,
so kind of what I was putting up here already, and we can use this, but like Jake was saying, you can do weighted, you can do unweighted, you can do that. I think a really simple way just for you guys, if you're someone that needs to work on this ring muscle up, you do some weighted on Monday and then you do unweighted on Friday, but it's the same movement pattern. And then one you can do more volume accumulation, one you can do higher load, and then we pick something on Wednesday. So linear progression specifically, let's use the weighted. So let's say we do ring dip, ring pull up, superset, right? And we're gonna do 6 reps on these, week 1. And we're gonna load them. And let's say we do 4 sets, well, let's do 4 to 5 sets. On both of them, you're gonna superset with like a belt around your waist with weight hanging. You're gonna build to a heavy 6 in 4 to 5 sets. The next week, do the same exact thing, build to a heavy 4. The next week, do the same exact thing, build to a heavy 2.
Simplicity.
Right? Friday, let's say we're doing the same thing, but we're doing volume accumulation. This is one way I like to do it. Jake might do it a little differently, but I love to start with like AMRAPs. So I would take both and do a 60-second AMRAP. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the average of both the 60-second AMRAPs and I'm gonna give it to you. Let's say we do 3 60-second AMRAPs. I'm gonna give you the average of the reps that you get, and we're gonna do 4 sets of it. And then the next week I'm gonna do 4 sets again, and I'm just gonna add plus 2 to 3 reps to your average. And then we're gonna deload and retest and repeat.
Love that. I might even take it a little bit different direction too, where Dom's doing the AMRAP and basically gets the same job done, where I would be more concerned with some of the athletes going, man, if I'm gonna do an AMRAP, I'm gonna do singles the whole way in the pull-up. And I'm like, I don't want you doing singles the whole way unless we're doing it weighted or something like that. So I might write it even more simply. Oh man, we gotta go to the knee. We need a bigger whiteboard. I'm gonna go AMRAP -2, week 1. And then AMRAP, I'll explain this in a second here, -1. Well, so this would be week 1, week 2, and then week 3 would be AMRAP to fail. And maybe I'm doing 3 sets. So week 1, I'm doing 2 reps shy of failure. Week 2, I'm doing 1 rep shy of failure. And week 3, I'm taking every set to absolute failure. So you're getting better at doing extended sets in this example. And then Dom and I talk about programming all the time. We're bouncing ideas off of each other. I'll typically go, now where do I go next? I'll go into Dom's example, right? And I'll kind of roll right into his 60-second AMRAPs. I've done that a lot with athletes now in the past year since working with Dom. So that would be the beginner strength example. Real quick, Dom, you want to touch on Wednesdays? What would you typically plug in on the Wednesday?
So on a Wednesday day, what I might do there, since we're talking strength, is I might actually get us away from the rings and do some things like a close grip bench press or a bench press progression or a dumbbell bench progression, and actually work on horizontal pressing and pulling. And then we're going vertical pull here on these 2 days. I might switch that to like an actual barbell bent over row or a weighted feet elevated ring row, different things like that. Just working different planes and different movements and setting up different accessory work for that as well.
And if we go back to what's the limiter, right? Like in the last conversation we were talking about, what is the actual limiter? And you start looking under the hood. Well, that's different for different people. Sometimes in the pull-up, right, or let's take the dip, it could be more chest, it could be more tricep, it could be more shoulder. Wednesday's a good day to start picking apart your individual limiters, putting in some isolation work, or even compound movements. For example, let's say it's your tricep, close grip bench, right?
Skull
crushers, yeah, all the isolation movements that you could plug in there on Wednesdays. But I think for the beginner, the coaches are going to laugh at me who watch this, the coaches in Mayhem Performance, because I love this quote and I kill it all the time. It's from Steve Jobs. But he always said, simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication, and nothing could be more true for the beginner. Beginners need simplicity, linear progressions. Do the same thing over and over and over again. It's called the principle of specificity. When I was a middle school PE teacher, we taught our kids that all the time. You want to get better at benching? Go do bench press. You want to get better at ring muscle ups? Go do ring pull-ups and ring dips. Just do it over and over and over again. And when you're the beginner, you'll benefit from that linear progression. You can keep running that for a long time. When it stops working, now that's where we transition to you're the intermediate athlete. Dom, how would you start to approach the intermediate?
Yeah. And I think even with this as well, like we talked about these strength progressions, you can sneak in some skill on those days before you start. So if you have an issue with the turnover, it's like starting with some banded low ring transitions, and then you do all your strength work. I mean, keep that very simple.
Skill first.
Yep. Yeah. When it comes to the intermediate athlete, they have the skill developed. So that's where we're going to move. I think a lot of the strength stuff doesn't leave much from the intermediate athlete. I actually keep a lot of that in there. If not, maybe just challenge them a little more in the positions and in the volume that we're doing. But one thing that we would start to consistently do is multiple times a week actually do ring muscle ups. And we would do it in small sets. And Jake and I talked about this a little bit, but I think a really easy way to do it would be something like this, and this is just a simple linear progression that we were thinking about, is it starts with 2 unbroken ring muscle ups. We rest, depending on the athlete, 30 to 60 seconds. And that's it. We do that potentially all 3 days, right? Then on the next week, add a rep. So you do 3 unbroken, resting as needed, maybe add a rep or pull down the sets and do bigger reps with an extended rest in between. Sometimes with athletes, I'll do something like this. We'll do 5 sets of, let's say, 4 unbroken with a 60-second rest. And then I'll do like a 3-minute rest. And then we'll do another 5 sets of the same thing so that they can get enough rest to hit the 4s unbroken. Right? And we can, obviously that's progressing each week, week 1, week 2, week 3. Lots of different ways you can do that, but I think the biggest difference between intermediate and beginner is we're actually going to start doing muscle ups, not necessarily under fatigue, but accumulating a big total volume throughout the week and paying attention like from week 1 to week 2 to week 3. In the total week of volume, are we increasing it? So let's say we hit 20 in the first week total, the next week maybe we hit 30, and then the next week maybe 40, or maybe a smaller progression than that. We had 5 reps a week.
And to those of you guys who might be saying, well, what about constant variance? And what about CrossFit and constantly varied movement, actually high intensity? Okay, we're not talking about general fitness right now. We're talking about sport, right? And you're trying to get better at your sport, and there's something that's holding you back, like the ring muscle up. So we're gonna attack that limiter. Like the other part of it where people are like, okay, well, but isn't that kind of boring doing the same thing over and over? Well, man, I'll start ranting on that, but I'll hold back a little bit. Yeah, you know what? I'll acknowledge that. It can be boring. My kind of line I've always said though, but it's like, again, we're talking about sport, and the whole purpose of sport, what's the most fun is trying to win, right? And improve and see improvement. And so sometimes it's okay for the training to be boring. If you keep your head down, you grind through those boring seasons of training, it's going to yield a result that's going to be a whole lot of fun, which is winning or accomplishing something that you never thought was possible before. So I just had to squeeze that in there real quick.
First thing you do at the start of every basketball game is layup drills.
Oh, there we go. Amen.
Simple. Anything to add to intermediate?
I had another idea, and then it just completely left my mind, so I'll circle back. I'll touch on another thing here too. I'll hear a lot of athletes go, well, you know, Jake and Dom, you've probably heard this, like at what point am I going to start doing like ring muscle ups in a workout? And leading into competition, you always have me doing them on their own. Like, when am I going to ever know how to do them when I'm like rowing and with wall balls or whatever? And first of all, like 99% of the time I do that, but a good reminder is that if your current max unbroken ring muscle up is like 3, and I get you from 3 ring muscle ups to doing 7 and 8 unbroken, I don't care if you've never done it with rowing and wall balls. When you do it in a workout with rowing and wall balls, because we just doubled or tripled your max unbroken set, you will be better even if you've never done it under fatigue before. So I'm not saying don't do that, because that's our sport and it goes back to specificity. You have to know what it feels like to do them under fatigue. but don't be so focused on doing that at the expense of never actually getting better at it in a linear progression. So,
amen, praise God, hallelujah. Yeah. And that's another thing you can do in the progression of over the weeks. Like let's say you had a 12-week plan working on the ring muscle up, weeks 1 through 4, accumulation, the retest is a max unbroken set. If that set goes up again, you do accumulation again, you retest the unbroken set, it goes up again. So you go from 3 to 6, you go from 6 to 12. Then on the last 4 weeks, your coach is paying attention to that. And maybe now you're doing 2 days of accumulation and 1 day under a little bit of mixed work. And then on the deload on the 12th week, you retest an open workout with the ring muscle ups at the end and you see what you can do.
That'll be maybe
that's how you know.
Another future video, episode 36. No, maybe we'll do that next one is like, what does that progression look like? How do you go from training in isolation to doing it under fatigue? And how do you progress that fatigue? We can talk about that. We'll touch on a little bit with elite now, but we can really dive into that in another video. But Dom, take us. Good. Dom's got the most experience with elite athletes, working with our on-site athletes. So how do you approach, do you have an athlete on the top of your, top of the mind that struggles with this?
Man,
that you work with right now?
So, it does vary like throughout the season. Like there are athletes who like the ring muscle up is a limiter and they have very specific limiters into what affects it. So I have some athletes that are really good when it's like back-to-back shoulder fatigue. That's a real thing. But I have athletes that really struggle when it is a hip flexion issue. So if hip flexion volume gets high, they struggle in their turnover on the ring muscle up and their grip is fine. I have a lot of athletes that really struggle when it's like back-to-back pulling movements. So like the quarterfinal workout is an awesome example of that. So many ways we can train that. There's also tons of athletes who really struggle to quickly get started in a set of ring muscle ups when they're breathing really hard. That's a whole separate limiter in and of itself. That's the tricky part with elite. These guys are we're easier to isolate and see the issue and know what to work on. This is all about figuring out which limiter to attack and which one is the biggest problem. So I just mentioned like 3 different kinds. Is it shoulder, is it grip, or is it breathing? Well, based on the athlete, they might struggle with all 3 of those. Which one is the worst? The one that's the worst is the one I'm gonna focus on the most in the off season. I'll sprinkle in the other ones, or sometimes I'll put them together, like breathing, hip flexion, and the ring muscle up. Okay.
You have an athlete example you can think of off the top of your head? Like
I mean, all my females need ring muscle up work way more than the males. For sure, that is just like a general thing. And I've worked with all of them on ring muscle up under fatigue specifically.
What about Haley Adams right now?
For sure.
What is her
So actually coming off the games, like she was feeling really like struggling with them. But like we've done a ton of work on them. I actually took this from Jake, but we started with really like high set stuff and lower rep, like 3 to 6 rep range, and doing really high sets with shorter rests so she does a lot better in an aerobic setting. So breathing is never really an issue for her muscle ups at all. Right? That is the one difference from her and my other athletes. But the shoulder fatigue is a massive limiter for her. She does actually even really good with grip. So what we would do here is we would pair this ring muscle up with like little things like double unders that would fatigue the shoulders a little bit for her. Every once in a while, I'd sneak in some really low rep handstand push-ups. My favorite one to do with ring muscle up for her is a wall ball because it's leg driven, but the press really affects it, especially a 20-pound wall ball. For females is really good. Once we got really confident in this 3 to 6 rep range, I actually was giving her a workout today and I was like, I want to see where we're at. And I'm not even worried about going unbroken for her because you don't always have to go unbroken to be good, but I wanted to test like how quickly can we do like a set of 4-3 on a set of 7 in a workout. And it looked something like this. And we've been progressing towards this a lot, but it was 4 sets, 7 ring muscle ups, 11 kettlebell squats, 53 pounds, and then a 13 calorie row, which can affect some grip. And then we were doing something crazy. We started with a 3-minute rest, and then every set we subtracted 60 seconds. And I'm doing that specifically to see what happens here as the rest gets taken away. But it gives her the confidence to start a couple rounds probably with 7s and then figure out if she can do this 4-3 in a really fatigued setting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I call this capacity training to put like a name to it. Again, the teacher and me always, we got to name it, right? So we can remember it. So capacity, which I define as doing the same amount of work in less overall time, right? So same work, same volume, shrinking the rest down, capacity training. You're going to go one more?
Yeah, so I was going to say something I've done. we've been doing this a lot too, is something we'll do with this as well so that they can maintain unbroken sets. Oops. This would be like the opposite thing, is we would actually start with like a 90-second rest, and then I'll increase it by 30 seconds each round to preserve the unbroken set.
Well, now this, my friends, is what we call intensity, right? So when Dom increases the rest, you think, wait a minute, that's getting easier. But listen to what he just said. It's so she can go unbroken. So it's actually increasing the intensity. It's allowing her to go harder, like faster, and do unbroken sets. So increasing the rest is allowing her to have more recovery and just go faster and again do more unbroken sets. So I would call that a form of intensification.
And sometimes we'll even do that on site. Sometimes I'll write these workouts like this, and they'll be like, what's the rest? And I'll be like, let's figure it out as we go.
Nice.
And so I'll watch the set, and based on what I feel like I'm seeing, I'll be like 2 minutes. And then on the next set, I might say same rest. And then the set after that, I might be like 3 minutes because they fall apart. And then the set after that, when Haley's like, oh, we should do 5 instead of 4, because that happens a lot, and I'll be like, all right, 4-minute rest.
This is where we're really stealing from the bodybuilding world and doing pre and post exhaust training, right? We're just, a lot of once you start getting into like higher levels, you're thinking about like, how can I throw some things in there that's going to, it's some curveballs, right? Because these people have been training for a long time. They've done a lot of different programs. How can I hate to use this, it sounds overly simplistic, but shock their bodies a little bit and give them a stimulus they've never felt before. So pre-exhaust would be like, I'm gonna fatigue, like Dom was saying here, if I do some wall balls before the ring muscle up. One way that I like to progress it, Dom, you can maybe chicken scratch this out too if you want to, but is I like to just change where the ring muscle up's showing in a workout. So if I wrote something like Dom had, like 4 sets, and I had, let's put like maybe ski wall ball ring muscle up, and I'll change the exercise selection each week, but maybe week 1, the muscle up shows up first. And then week 2, the muscle up shows up second. And then week 3, the muscle up shows up last. And it can be that simple. And again, just for some fun and variation, especially for the elite athletes, like I'm not using the same 3 movements all the time. Sometimes I will. Sometimes for the beginner and intermediate, if I'm trying to do some of this interference work, if they're beginner intermediate in other areas, but they're a little more advanced with a particular movement, I'll use this example too as well. And again, it's just your muscle up is now being done with a lot of pre-fatigue, breathing, shoulder fatigue with the wall ball, even some shoulder and tricep fatigue with the ski too as well. So, I mean, Dom is right. When we're talking about elite athletes and doing things under fatigue, there's so many layers that you could peel off. You have to first determine what's the actual limiter that's fatiguing them, and then that's where you can get creative with how you're gonna approach it. It's creative within these overarching principles, right? And that's what we're trying to teach you is what is the principle here in particular. It's like find out where the fatigue is and limiter is and combine it with the particular movement that you're struggling with. And you can increase rest, decrease rest. You could set it up in different structures. You could do it on the minute piece. You could do 4 sets. You could do it for time. It doesn't really matter. The principle remains the same, right? So
with the elite athlete, one of my favorite things to do, and I can close us up on this, but one of the goals I try to do with my elite athletes is when we do go compete in elite functions, I'm like, one thing I'm excited about competing this weekend is finding new limiters. So a lot of athletes go into like the CrossFit games and all they're focused on is how am I gonna get in the top 10? How am I gonna get on the podium? How whatever. And every time I go into those big comps, I'm like, something is gonna get programmed that is outside of my bias of programming. And it's gonna allow me to learn a new limiter so I can find new things to do in training for the elite athlete. Great example of that was like the freestanding handstand push-up at the end of that handstand push-up sled workout at the games. I think those freestanding were way harder for most of those games level athletes than they thought. And they weren't expecting that type of fatigue there because most of those guys can do 12 to 15 unbroken freestanding handstand push-ups without thinking. So we find some new limiters there also in terms of the amount of volume of pre-fatigue going in. So it's like use competition to figure out new movement pairing limiters so you can really even isolate it down to like what's the one movement that affects the muscle up, because there are athletes out there where they can do ring muscle ups with everything until it's paired with that one thing.
And if I had to leave with one more thing too, not that I have to get the final word, but it's like, don't use advanced methods until you have to use advanced methods. Do simple until simple stops working. Like, don't play your biggest card when you don't have to use it yet. Like, get really freaking strong. Do more work. And then when it no longer works, start pulling out advanced methods. And if you're one of those athletes who's like, I don't even know how to do the simple work, or you're like, I've been doing the simple work and I'm hitting a bottleneck, I've hit a plateau, right? I've been doing this for a few years and I can't get my ring muscle ups or any other particular movement, my snatch up or whatever it might be. I can't break through that particular plateau. That's why email Jake Foster at mayhemnation.com. Again, it's been a lot of fun answering your questions. So send that over. If you guys have ideas or topics you want us to cover too, email me those as well. And stay tuned for episode number 3.